We're going to cover the best aspects around the One Big Beautiful Bill. I know I've knocked it a little bit, but hey, I want to come back and provide you guys with some of the best things that are most applicable to normal freaking people. And a lot of the stuff that we talked about in the past, you know, I mentioned I'm worth over $5 million. I've got a multi-million-dollar company, and I've talked through these aspects, how I'm purchasing a multi-million-dollar property that's going to be a huge investment. And I've talked about these things and how this tax bill has helped me, right? And I have had a little bit of negativity around it, but one of the big factors here is I'm sitting in my little hole in Colombia on a business trip, is that I wanted to share some of the big factors that I think can help normal people that are looking for a bigger success so that they can save as much money as possible so that we can have greater income than expenses. That's always going to be what it comes down to, is how can we have greater income than expenses? Once we have greater income than expenses, that's when we can really start to freaking roll. Now, I want to share the first big aspect around the One Big Beautiful Bill for everybody, and I think this is probably the most important thing. And I have a couple other things on the back end here where I want to start to talk through some of the big aspects around how companies could potentially be hiring a lot more in the future based around some of the savings that they're going to have. But the biggest part that I think is the biggest win is going to be the standard deduction. Okay, so under the new bill, the standard deduction was increased, again, building on what the TICJA did back in 2017. So essentially, you won't have to pay any taxes if you're married and you're making a combined, you know, the first $31,500, you don't have to pay anything of taxes, nothing. So it's going to be easier to file. If you're a single filer, that's going to be $15,750. So that's going to be a lot easier, where you don't have to itemize things, you don't have to go through all this paperwork. It's basically like anything underneath that as a joint married couple, you are not going to be taxed on. So that's going to be a big, big positive aspect. Now, I know I've also mentioned in the past talking about no tax on tips. Okay, so now the big factor here with no tax on tips is that we have to remember that this is up to $25,000 of not having any taxes on that. But that means that this is actually part of, let's say if you make $100K and you're tipped $25,000, that comes off that $100K. So it is a deduction off of your income. Now, if you're making a lot less than that, this is going to be really, really freaking beneficial. If you're a $50,000 a year person and you get $25,000 in tips, that's a deduction, and you aren't going to get taxed. And that's going to be a big deal for a lot of people who are just middle class earners, trying to freaking get ahead, trying to save things. And we have to think through all this stuff when we're looking at the benefits. Okay, I like to think through, first, you've got to save money for your emergency fund. Okay, so when we're looking at the standard deduction, we can't look at it and say, oh man, I'm going to have $31,500. It's not going to be taxed. That's what my standard deduction is. I'm going to go out and throw a party. We have to think through what we can do with that. And we're going to get into a couple other big aspects around the One Big Beautiful Bill, but I think that the aspect similarly is that in the service industry, a lot of people aren't mentioning this. If we're in the service industry, typically these people in the service industry tend to live pretty fly-by-night type lives where they party a lot, they drink a lot. And if you're in that industry and you can save the money from no tax on tips, freaking save it. Don't let yourself go out to another bar and drink and like meet up with these other service industry people. Like, try to genuinely sit here and challenge yourself. I'm going to save this money so that I can possibly, build up my emergency fund for 6 months. I'm going to put in $7,000 into my Roth IRA. I am going to do these things. I'm going to save money for a down payment on a house. Like, I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to work my butt off, and I'm going to get as high a tips as possible so that I'm not taxed. But I'm going to do this so that I can keep pushing this forward and continuously chipping away at those financial goals. Now, the next one, no tax on overtime pay. Okay, this is going to be the same thing. This bill is going to let you deduct up to $12,500 in overtime pay, $25,000 if you're a couple, and this means that you won't pay on that income as well. It's going to be designed. This is supposedly designed for the working class. I still think it's one of those things where you're going to see people starting to finagle with this a little bit, and I think you're going to be able to. I was thinking about myself personally, like I'm working 60, 70 hours a week, and we have 3 different types of entities. theoretically, I could have an entity tipping or paying myself in overtime. Now, I don't think that's the absolute best thing to do, but I think in this case, if you're working overtime, dude, we know that based off of the jobs reports, the average American is only working 34 and a half hours a week on average, okay? 34 to 34 and a half hours a week. So what does this mean? This is incentivizing us to try to work more, 40 hours, and then get the overtime pay. And if you get, a lot of companies pay time and a half for overtime. So then you get that overtime pay, right? And you can deduct up to $12,500 off of your salary. That's good earnings that now you can use, and you can start to strategically move things around. But it's an enticing way to get us to work more, which we should be doing. And then as we work more, we need to start to make those strategic decisions of, okay, if I'm working more, how can I move this stuff around and how can I do a better job? And then on top of that, an employer is willing, because you're working more overtime, they're more willing to see that you're more, you're making greater sacrifices, you're providing more value to the company. And when you provide more value to the company, and if there's other tax breaks for the business owner, which there are a lot of, they can start to think through, okay, this individual works their ass off, and if they work very, very hard, now the next thing that I can do is start to invest in that person even further. Okay, so that's the theory here. Now, I want to bring up a lot of the growth, the GDP growth models that people will put out, and that's how we're going to chip away at the debt. That's not going to happen. None of this stuff's going to happen as far as like from a country perspective. That will not be what ends up occurring. One of the other things I want to bring up here is because I want to get into the interest deductions, okay? A lot of us are out there going, well, at least I know what's going to happen with my taxes. We have to remember, I'm down here in Colombia, I'm on a business trip. This is a country that a lot of people talk about as a tax haven, and I'm going, dude, our government, go around the rest of the world. Our government does a pretty damn good job. Like, and not to be a diehard American, but like, dude, our taxes are going to pay the debt. Our taxes are going to defense, okay? Well, they're going into infrastructure, and a lot of the infrastructure industry is subsidized, yes. So a lot of tax breaks get moved over to the infrastructure industry and commodities, stuff like that. But it provides stability, and it provides some reasonable regulations. And I think that when we're thinking about paying taxes, it's okay that we pay taxes, because when you're going on business trips to these other countries, a lot of the other countries, they don't have the stuff that we have. So we are very privileged, and we've got to recognize, like, it's okay to pay taxes if you're living in the United States and you got the defense aspect, and you got some of the infrastructure things that we have. I'm saying this as I'm complaining about the Wi-Fi down here, because I'm so fortunate to have good Wi-Fi back home. Now, going back to this, if we're looking at mortgage interest, $750,000 cap on deductible mortgage interest still applies for new mortgages. Older loans are still covered under the old $1 million limit. So basically, you take out a mortgage if it's under $750K, that's where the cap is. And the interest on that can be taken off and deducted off of your income, which is a big thing. So now keep in mind, I had another video of the dumbest part of the One Beautiful Bill, and one of those is new car loan interest deductions. Please watch that, okay? Because don't get conned by the car loan interest portion of the bill. It's absolutely horrific, and you should not take advantage of it. Now, as far as the mortgage interest stuff, mortgages and purchasing a home, sometimes they're not the best financial decision, but if you own a family, it's great for stability. Now, next big thing that I think is a huge part of the One Beautiful Bill is the SALT deduction. So the old SALT cap was at $10,000, and this is state and local tax. A lot of people in high tax states hate the fact that if they're paying a large amount, you live in New York, you live in California, you're paying a large amount of taxes, state and local taxes, and it doesn't get deducted off your federal income bill. Now that comes back. However, it comes back up to $40,000. Okay, so whatever you pay, if you pay state and local taxes up to $40K, that $40K gets deducted off your federal income tax. Now, the big factor here is that this will expire around 28 or 29. So we do just have to keep that in mind. Now, a couple other things that I wanted to bring up, and honestly, I would say that for me, as far as personally for me, the R&D taxes and any type of deductions on vehicles or new buildings, these are big things as far as an R&D deduction. So if you own a company, and I want to say this to a lot of you out there, is that if you want or are thinking about starting a company, start a company now. Okay, start a company now. You have your side gig and you keep busting your butt on your side gig, but then you start this company, right? And when you start your company, you can use R&D and use the deductions in the first year. And so if you can turn a profit, and so one thing for us personally in our one multi-million-dollar company is that we put a lot of money into R&D, and then we can deduct in that first year. And if that expense pays off immediately within the first 6 to 12 months, we will spend more money on R&D, we'll invest more money into our company, and we'll get a greater return. And the theory is that if we're doing that, other companies that are sort of supporting your immediate company will start to grow because the tax limit gets decreased, from the overall deduction. And I think that that's one thing, and that's something that you can even do with purchasing a building. That's something that I would recommend for somebody who is trying to get their feet are coming under them. They've got their stuff paid off. They got the emergency fund is taken care of. Their retirement's lined up, and you're thinking about really taking that next step. You can start to look for creating some type of business, and then you can start to classify things like R&D and mortgage loans, and you can start to really take advantage of these cool aspects in the One Beautiful Bill. I know I've been negative, and I know I talk about all the time how privileged we are and that paying taxes is part of the privilege of living in the United States. Stop saying things like, wow, at least now I know where my money's going for taxes. Well, dude, you should know where it's going no matter what. That's one thing I will say I like to hammer home. We are paying taxes because it's privilege. It's the benefit of being an American, okay? Now, with that being said, and even I didn't even mention the fact that the tax brackets are staying the way that they have been since TICJA was passed in 2017. That's a huge plus. But honestly, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. I really like the SALT deduction. The standard deduction is absolutely fantastic. Those are really, really pivotal things that will help the middle class continue to get their feet under them and continue to grow. I hope that helps somebody out there. Until next time, peace.